Good evening, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Have a good night, everyone, and God bless you. Alright, the following is a collection of news from Patriots. Let's get into the news this late Saturday night. And another race that we're looking at here on, of course, Georgia. And we have Stacey Abrams, who is trying to win the election in Georgia to become the next governor there. She's going against Brian Kemp. And the polls continue to look worse and worse. I did a story on this last week talking about Stacey Abrams being behind in the polls by I believe it was like 5 points, 8 points, I believe it was that we talked about, and that margin continues to widen, along with Herschel Walker seems to be pulling away from Raphael Warnock or whatever his name is over there in Georgia. So the people of Georgia are getting excited. They are getting ready to oust of many of these Democrat people who have not the best interests of the state of Georgia at hand. Instead, of course, they, like many Democrats, have the interests of themselves at the heart of it. How can I continue to push policies that will make this a one-party rule in the state of Georgia? And that's the things that people like Stacey Abrams are seeking to do, along with the backing of national Democrats, people like Pelosi and Biden's regime. And that's what we're seeing play out right now. These battlefields that are unfolding for us right now, ahead of the midterm elections. We have Georgia, we were watching Arizona. There's some other states out there that we're watching as well. And we're going to see how this takes place and how it's going to play out. But the news right now, it looks promising for the Republicans in the state of Georgia. And that's great news for the country. Because if we can go ahead and expel Warnock out of the Senate and put it Herschel Walker, who's so hard, he said that he's not going to take a salary, because he doesn't need the money. He's there to serve for the people. I wish more politicians would do that. More politicians would say, hey, I'm there to observe as a servant of the people, instead of trying to enrich myself. So let's go and take a look what we have here. It says Democrats are currently losing every major race in Georgia. Stacey Abrams is getting her butt kicked right now. Who couldn't have ever imagined that, right? It says right now. The latest Atlantic Journal Constitution poll paints a very bleak picture for Georgia Democrats in November. In nearly every statewide election, all Democratic candidates aside from us, Senator Raphael Warnock is facing a huge deficit less than 2 months before the election, where Doc has distilled down 2 points to Herschel Walker, and the poll. So we got Walker 46. We got Kemp at 50%, Jones at 43. And Biden's approval ratings at 37%. One fatal mistake Democrats have made is making Joe the face of the midterms. It was a terrible idea. Now, they linked to him and sinking ship to these candidates. And when your approval is in the mid to low 30s. That's a very bonehead move. But Biden is an egomaniac, so I'm sure he insists he get out there and stump for his candidates. He does not know how much the American people dislike him. You can't even call him nice and old. He's angry, divisive, short-tempered. There's nothing here like he sucks, and so does his policies. I will say this much. I'm very excited to see Stacey Abrams lose in the landslide. I wonder if she'll still run for president. She's like the female version of Beto. She's addicted to losing. But again, that's the elitist ego. They'll go out there and out of touch with regular people that have no clue of how much people don't want them. And here we have it. It's perfectly okay. People, I didn't help remember that classic photo of her being in a school with a bunch of kids and her obviously couldn't be bothered to put a mask on. And as we continued to mask kids in the states, Georgia, that's a disgrace by the way that was still taking place. Hopefully, I don't live in the state of Georgia, or my northern neighbors. Hopefully they have dropped a lot of those policies and they're no longer adhering to masking all the kids in schools. I'm sure there might be a couple of crazy schools and places like Atlanta and other places. But for the majority of Atlanta, majority of Georgia, I really truly hope that they are ditching those things. Anyway, it looks like things are heating up in Georgia. I'm excited to see how this takes place. How it turns out, so let me know. Do you live in the state of Georgia? Are you supporting Brian Kemp or at least a Republican on that ticket? And if you're voting for him, why are you voting for him? And of course, if you're a Stacey Abrams supporter, if you're Democrat here, tell me why you're supporting Stacey Abrams. Why do you believe her policies are better than anybody else's? Again, the non-stop witch hunt against President Trump continues. They tried Russian collusion. They tried January 6th, they tried raiding his home. None of it's worked. He's polling stronger than ever in virtually every single battleground state. So now, A corrupt attorney general in New York is filing a lawsuit against him and his family. And it ain't gonna work either. We're going to expose what's really going on here, and we're gonna see precisely why, to the Democrats' horror, the Trump train is unstoppable. Alright, political strategist Stick Morris has a great piece out today in the Western Journal. And he makes the overall argument that the latest lawsuit filed against President Trump and his family. I mean, think about that. Against his family's 3 grown children is ultimately rooted in the fact that the Democrats fear Trump more than anyone else. I mean, fear, I would add desperation. These are the 2 things that are behind the latest lawsuit. In fact, I would say fear and desperation are the linchpins, the connective tissue between this lawsuit and the FBI raids on Mar-a-Lago and on other MAGA. And I would certainly add the J6 Kangaroo Committee, headed by the resoundingly defeated outgoing shame of a congresswoman, the petty and petulant and utterly insufferable Liz Cheney. And I'm sure you know, the heinously corrupt opportunists, New York Attorney General Leticia James, follow the $250 million civil lawsuit against President Trump and his 3 adult children, Don Jr., Eric and Ivanka, accusing the Trump real estate empire of falsifying Trump's net worth in order to minimize his company's tax bills while getting favorable treatment from banks and insurance companies. Now, if you don't know who this Democrat Attorney General Leticia James is, why don't we let one of her New York colleagues, Representative Claudia Tenney, introduce her to you? Everyone listen to this. Yeah, this is a complete political hit job. It'd been what Leticia James's entire mission has been, a political mission to take down Donald Trump. It's not about helping senior citizens across New York who've been scammed. It's not about dealing with New York's horrible crime crisis, which is facing New Yorkers across the state. She represents the entire state of New York, not just New York City. There's millions of people that need help from our Attorney General to enforce the laws, but she is particularly obsessed with trying to get Donald Trump. The mission is to get Donald Trump, his family, and remember something: Donald Trump is no longer a resident of New York State. He's provided millions of dollars in taxes and income to the state of New York as a native New Yorker. But this is really getting to a level, of course. Michael Henry, who is our statewide candidate for Attorney General, is actually in the lead because people loathe Leticia James. She is following in the footsteps of Andrew Cuomo, disgraced former prosecutor Schneiderman, Eliot Spitzer, and by the way, she is the most corrupt, and she is the most political, and I just named some pretty political attorney generals in the past. She's also what we call a New York and aspiring governor. That's another word for another term for ag. Yes, she wants to take out anyone in her place. She tried to take out Andrew Cuomo and forced him out of office without due process, as bad as Andrew Cuomo is and was, and I'm not a defender of Andrew Cuomo. He was never afforded due process. Now, the former president and his family aren't going to get due process. You know what I think about this right now? I'm a practicing lawyer in New York State. I have an obligation under the ethical considerations as a lawyer to think about possibly bringing a case against Leticia James for malicious prosecution or dereliction of her duty as an ag, because her obligation is to enforce the law, not to go on witch hunts, not to go after people and target people for political reasons only. She has combed through millions of documents, 3.5 years as you cite of investigation, and what have they found? Nothing. She has a civil case against Donald Trump. That, by the way, who was she protecting? In this case? We're talking about appraisals from multi-trillion-dollar banks. The banks have the resources and the ability, and they do know how to do their own appraisals. I was a bank attorney. I represented banks. Okay, they don't need Trump's appraisals. Banks obviously do their own due diligence. And Trump's company's been stellar. Look, President Trump himself, of course, has responded, calling it nothing more than a desperate witch hunt that's doomed to fail. I mean, look, even Bill Barr, hardly a Trump loyalist former Attorney General Bill Barr, a bona fide swamp creature, the deep state, even he said this was an obvious political hit job. I mean, you saw it in that video segment. Leticia James is in danger of losing her job. She's down to her Republican challenger. I mean, seriously, New York, it shouldn't even be that close. So she's getting desperate to holding on to her own career. But the bigger picture here, and the reason why the left-wing activists disguised as journalists, and the legacy media cheerleading all of this, the bigger picture is that the deep state permanent political class, the whole kit and caboodle, see Trump as their ultimate threat to their ultimate power. I mean, think it through. Morris pointed out, in 4 years as president, 2 years as former president, has there ever been a shred of evidence that Trump played fast and loose with our national secrets? And when it comes to classification or even the declassification material, we own the ultimate decision-making authority for such does not rest with unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. The ultimate decision-making authority for classification-declassification rests with the duly elected commander-in-chief, from whom the whole of the executive branch's bureaucracies derive their power. The administrative state does not have autonomous authority, irrespective of democratic processes. Their authority is derived from the commander-in-chief himself. So this is why you got people like Robert Barnes, the lawyer, saying that the FBI and the DOJ are trying to desperately to accuse Trump of a crime illegally can't commit. The president is ultimate decision-making authority in terms of classification. So to accuse Trump of illegally possessing classified documents is a contradiction in terms, and again, all of this is happening under democratic regimes that conveniently turn blind eyes to the super-colossal illegalities going on at the southern border, and in their own crime-infested cities, or Soros-backed EAs are allowing violent criminals to roam the streets in the name of racial and economic equity. And the good news is that people aren't buying it. A recent poll by the Trafalgar Group found that a clear plurality of likely voters believed the raid on Mar-a-Lago was entirely politically motivated, 87% of Republicans, 53% of independents, that it was nothing more than a hack political hit job. And what's even better, these shenanigans are only increasing Republican solidarity and resolve to shatter the feckless Democrats come November. The poll went on to ask, did the rate increase your motivation to vote November? Take a look at these numbers. 83% of Republicans, 8 out of 10, said that the Mar-a-Lago raid fired them up all the more to vote in the midterms. And the Trafalgar Group also recently found that 79% of Americans believe that we live in a two-tiered justice system that protects political insiders. That's 8 out of 10 Americans. That's also, it's not just here in the United States, as a very widely held sentiment throughout Europe as well. Populations are increasingly realizing that globalist societies fundamentally create two classes of people: the permanent political class and everyone else, and the permanent political class as the managerial class that governs and engineers the standardized political and economic systems imposed on all populations. They engineer society in such a way that creates rules for the but not for me. They engineer society such that political and economic protocols always work in their favor at our expense. Since the good news is, Dick Morris goes on to write in the article, is none of this is going to work. None of this is going to stop Trump from running for president. None of this is going to stop him from winning in 2024, not when it's so overwhelmingly perceived as a desperate attempt by the status quo to keep a bona fide champion of the people from power. And therefore to keep the people from power. The Democratic deep state is ultimately going to shatter over this. Trump is going to crush him in 2024, and then it's our turn. Thanks for being here, folks. If you appreciate these updates, please smash that like button.